oil prices continue to fall, and we look into the market manipulation and how it is affecting the price. This oil plunge is causing a global panic. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Let's get into this article. Oil falls in worst year since 2008 as Asian stocks gain. This article is out of Bloomberg, and they said crude oil resumed its slump, heading for its worst year since 2008. Amid speculation, U.S. stockpiles data today will fuel concern over a global supply glut. They get into other commodities as well. So let's take it from the top and just look at the fact that they're talking about 2008. This is what I've been mentioning as well in my other videos about oil, suggesting that we are headed towards another financial crisis. At least this is one additional indicator. Definitely not the only indicator. Oil can move down and we can still have a booming economy, but that's not the only indicator that we've been showing. And on here on this channel, I have showed countless indicators, and we'll go through more of those today. Now, they suggest that there is a global supply glut. I do not believe that all of a sudden the shale industry came out of nowhere and they found this supply and all of a sudden the price changed so rapidly. This is an unrealistic drop in the price of oil, assuming that is just new stockpiles being built up. This is really unreasonable in a historic sense. So let's move on right here, where we're talking about oil, continuing on out of Bloomberg View, and essentially talking about how this oil price affects different countries. Look at how Russia and Venezuela was very much affected by this, and even they said even this: low oil prices can fuel more unrest and fragmentation and increase the domestic and regional disruptive impact of extremist groups. This can go on in developing nations, but it can also go on in the developing world as well. This is something to look at to realize the price of any commodity, not just oil. If that country happens to be an oil exporting nation as one of its primary commodities, as soon as that begins to decline, we begin to have a currency crisis. That currency is obviously what people use to buy their everyday goods, and things become more expensive, even domestically in many cases. So this becomes a big problem when you have things like civil unrest that begin to occur. So obviously, when a commodity such as oil is having this big disruption, we need to look and consider all possibilities. This is the panic that could definitely be occurring, and it already has. You saw what happened with the Russian ruble, how fast things can move, all because of something like oil. Now, Venezuela is obviously big talk right here, being a big exporting nation. This is out of Reuters. Venezuela entered a recession in 2014 with the economy shrinking the first 3 quarters, according to their central bank. And essentially, they're blaming the wrong thing. But of course, it's not just oil, and it of course is not what they're saying, which is blaming their political opponents. That is never going to work. And what we have is a shrinking economy, and this is several percent over this past few years. You need to realize when you don't have real strong economic growth, when you're not actually making the middle class richer, you're going to have negative growth. And they said this, that a 12-month inflation reached 63.6% in an annualized manner here. 64% essentially, and the people can't survive on this type of inflation. You will destroy people's individual wealth. There's no coming back from this, and the only thing that they will do is create more socialist programs. They basically take the money from the individuals through taxation, through levies, and they will obviously just use it to fill up their own pockets. It's a sort of a form of crony capitalism in a way. It is a totalitarian regime when you have them stealing the wealth from the individual citizens, and this is one way to do that. They do it through inflation. The people in Venezuela are going to be hurt very, very badly by this. Now, oil is obviously a big factor here because the price of oil, as it begins to come down, you have that affecting every other piece of their economy and the whole world. Globally, we have issues here. But it isn't all commodities that are entering a deflation. We see assets such as the equities market in a rise. Now, what about other commodities? We're looking at wheat. Look at over the past 3 months how it has dramatically risen, and that is definitely in a major disparity with the price of oil. We should have a real different thing happening here, but that's not the case. We have this disparity that has been created. There are other commodities as well that we're definitely seeing things that don't make sense right now. I'll get into that in just a moment. I want to talk more about the oil here. According to the New York Times, ever since its rich reserves were discovered more than a half century ago, Saudi Arabia has pumped the oil needed to keep pace with the rising needs, becoming the mainstay of the global energy markets. And I just want to stop right there. This is from my book where I quote the New York Times. I'm not necessarily agreeing with them, but it is very interesting information. So let's go on. But the country's oil fields are now in decline, prompting industry and government officials to raise serious questions about whether the kingdom is going to be able to satisfy the world's thirst for oil. So what I wanted to mention by this is that we have natural supply and demand fundamentals, but that seems to be changing right now. They're blaming it on a glut that's the cause of this, when in fact it could have some effect on it, but not to this dramatic change that has been occurring. We are seeing market manipulation, whether that's coming from Saudi Arabia or not. We know specifically that some things are going on right now, and it is not just supply and demand fundamentals. Mark Faber definitely agrees in this regard. He said it's difficult to make any market predictions now. He actually is suggesting here that because of the government intervention, we're unable to predict anything that's occurring. This is a good interview to watch, a very short interview here, just a clip, but basically he's trying to say that as long as the Federal Reserve and the other central banks around the world are printing money and doing all the schemes that I continuously talk about here at the Money GPS, you're not going to be able to know what's happening. That's why wheat can rise as fast as it did, but at the same time oil can crash just as it did. And nothing is really moving in sync with each other anymore. We're seeing a market that is exclusively riding on what the central banks say, and that obviously puts a real big damper on the supply and demand fundamentals. Let's get into this out of oilprice.com. Nearly 50% plunge in the price of oil during the past 6 months is expected to leave oil-rich Saudi Arabia with its first budget deficit since 2011 and the largest in its history. So it is taking a nosedive right now in this sense, and this is obviously going to continue the further this drops. So obviously countries around the world, as I said before, that have the oil exports as a one of their major commodities, we need to look at that and realize that their currencies are most likely going to be hurt. And again, this is another article mentioning oil prices have been dropping since June because of a market glut. I really don't agree with this as a whole, and they also said that it's shale that's doing this. It just doesn't make sense for it to be dropping so fast in such a short period of time. I'd like to know your thoughts on that, of course. Please leave them down below in the comments so we could discuss it. This here is basically just trying to show you that it is not just oil, it is not just other commodities. We see how the overall output of the world is declining. In this example, just showing you China's manufacturing, how it is slowly declining here. We are seeing many of these fundamental indicators that are showing a decline. It's not just China, and this is just one chart. but I continuously will bring up this information. We can see the whole world is simply slowing down. Let's move on to this, and it's pretty sad to see this kind of talk still. Even after the financial crisis, people still haven't woken up to this. Greece is no longer the existential threat that it once posed. You can isolate a country without there being a huge wave of contagion. In fact, in my book, I wrote the words viral contagion multiple times, knowing that the catalyst, Greece, is going to be what happens as the dominoes fall. You can't stop it. You can't stop those dominoes from falling. You can do what they wanted to do at the World Economic Forum and have $100 trillion bazooka, but it's not going to stop it. This doesn't work like this because there is globalization, because they decided to tear down all the borders across the world and impose, through their technocratic agenda, have their strategies of global governance. And we see how bad that is when we have a time where there is a slowdown, where there are recessions, and this is getting worse. It's not getting any better. Look at what's happening in Europe. Look at the unemployment rates taking off. And now we have what's happening with oil really hitting hard. But at the same time, you just have the US stock market on average continuing to go up and up and up. And the farther it goes up, the faster and the harder it's going to crash down. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please give me a thumbs up if you found it informative. And of course, don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free. It's available at themoneygps.com. Just scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.